Well, we rode right through Death Valley, Boomer Sooner, Gig the Maggies, threw our longhorns up and lost and along the way. Roll Tide rode through Alabama, hit 'em hard at the farm in Stanford, ran the hill into War Eagle on the plains. Rocked the big house on the get out song, Mike and Robertson, the tomahawk chop, out on USC, the Buckeyes and Georgia Dog. Check it out, everybody, keep it locked where you got it. Gameday is in the city, get your weekend started. It's an amped up college party atmosphere, live crowd on fire, energy in the air.
Green Cross Road, David Turkey Dance, college football knowledge, the field day biz. Get fired up with that party today.
Trying to kick off, y'all, it's college game day. If you want a little bang in your yin yang, if you want a little hang in your sang sang, if you want a little ching in your shang shang, come along, come along, come along. Well, we're coming through your city.
This is League One NCAA football.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a League One college game day here to start season 18. We're excited to bring this to you guys as I, myself, Coach Silent Storm, is here today with Coach Spectre.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, folks. We got an exciting season 18 getting ready to kick off, and so we're going to give you a rundown of what to expect. But before we do that, let's talk just for a quick second and fill people in on what happened last season. At the end of season 17, we had four user teams finish in the top 20, in the top 10, with Syracuse finishing ranked number 1, claiming their 4th consecutive national title. Navy coming up in 2nd in the final coaches poll, and Central Michigan coming up in 3rd. 1, 2, 3 podium finishes for Syracuse, Navy, and Central Michigan. Navy, of course, coached by Six Gun Ninja, and Central Michigan coached by Coach Blitzkrieg. Mississippi State rounds out the top 10 finishers from last season. Mississippi State, led by Coach R. Bark, narrowly missed going to the SEC championship game, but did make it into a major Cotton Bowl berth, and Citrus Bowl, and they won the Citrus Bowl in thrilling fashion. Central Michigan in a overtime victory in the Orange Bowl over Ohio State, and Navy wiping the floor with USC in the Rose Bowl. Those four teams leading the way last season. Other teams that finished ranked, 16th ranked Hawaii, led by Coach Silent Hawk in his final season with the Warriors. The Rainbow Warriors going 12-2 and finishing 16th in the polls. Washington right behind them, led by Coach Sweetest Coin, and the Washington Huskies go 9-4, finish ranked 17th in the polls to round out the 6 user teams that finished in the top 25 rankings. Hawaii, led by Coach Silent Hawk, and Central Michigan, led by Coach Blitzkrieg, joined the coach at Utah, Jay Brack, and the three of them parlayed their success at Utah, Hawaii, and Central Michigan into new jobs during the offseason. And Brack is now the head coach at West Virginia University, and Blitzkrieg now the head coach at University of Minnesota, joining Indiana in the Big Ten, in our user teams in the Big Ten, and joining Bark in the SEC at Arch Miss is Coach Silent Hawk. So Ole Miss and Mississippi State now, two user teams that will face off at the end of every season for the Egg Bowl, and that promises to be an exciting, budding rivalry. So three exciting updates, three exciting new destinations for three of our coaches, leading here into season 18.
Yeah, it's really exciting to see those changes in the offseason. A lot of speculation early about these coaches leaving. Obviously, Coach Brack gets a dream job of his alma mater at West Virginia, and then Coach Blitzkrieg and Coach Silent Hawk both getting a big Power 5 offers for them, and it's going to be really exciting to see them. They both joining fellow users in those Power 5 conferences, and of course that Ole Miss Mississippi State is going to be very exciting to have a user rivalry game year in and year out, as long as those coaches are at the schools. So really excited about that. Can't wait for a lot of these games that are coming up here in season 18. And talking about these games, we're going to go ahead and look at the official release of the 18th season League One schedules. We will go alphabetically to make it a lot easier for us. And the first team on tap for that is going to be Buffalo. And they open up that season. This is a big one I see in the first half of the year. In a neutral site game in Soldier Field, Chicago, they're going to go against Minnesota. These former coaches playing each other in MAC action, because this is the previous coach at Central Michigan. So excited to see these two face off against one another.
Yeah, this is a former intra-conference rivalry. Now with Coach Blitzkrieg at Minnesota, we will get to see them in action at least one more time against each other as Buffalo, Minnesota will travel to Chicago to Soldier Field. That'll be an exciting week one game. That's one of two neutral site games. We'll get to the other one later. But Minnesota, Buffalo in Chicago to kick off the year promises to be an exciting affair. Looking at the rest of Buffalo's schedule, obviously they have the rivalry game against Temple in week 3. They've got the user game against WVU in week 4. That'll be an exciting user game as West Virginia, Coach Brack at a new position there at WVU, as Coach just mentioned, his dream job, but a little bit of rebuilding necessary there at WVU. It'll be interesting to see the matchup between a previously established roster, one that Plymouth Guru has been working on for a number of years at Buffalo, taking on a coach at a new position with some mortar and bricks left to be done there for the Mountaineers. So that'll be an exciting matchup. And then Buffalo gets into MAC action. They got a couple of winnable games against the two directional Michigan schools. A challenging game on the road at Ohio. Last year, that game came down to the wire between Buffalo and Ohio in Buffalo. This year, it'll be in Ohio, in Athens. That team, of course, built up by a former coach, the now retired coach, Doc Jocular, and therefore a very good roster. Ohio was a top 3 rushing team last year, and once again, that was a razor-thin game last year. That'll be an exciting one that you want to circle and catch if you can. Week 10, they've got the user game against Ole Miss. Coach Silent Hawk, another coach at a new location, and once again, a little bit more brick and mortar work to be done at Ole Miss. It'll be interesting in Buffalo with the established Buffalo Bulls. That'll be a good matchup. And then following that, back into Maction with a game on the road against formerly coached by Blitzkrieg Central Michigan. They come into the season ranked 7th. So that should be a very tense and tight affair as well. That'll be on the road for the Bulls. And then they close out with Akron, Bowling Green, and Kent State. Now, Bowling Green ranked 25th. They have finished in the polls the last 2 seasons running. They have been ranked fairly regularly. They are along with Central Michigan, probably the 2 toughest contenders for the MAC title. Ohio, of course, will be challenging. Those 3 MAC games will be the toughest for Buffalo. And, last season they rebounded from a miserable year 2 years ago in season 16. They were able to make it to a bowl with an 8-5 record and have a successful year at Buffalo. They made it to the conference championship game. They hope to contend for the MAC title again this year. But as I just mentioned, Ohio, Central Michigan, and Bowling Green will all have words, and they'll have their input on how the conference race shapes up.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough one for Buffalo this year. They have a very tough schedule. To their advantage, we'll have to see. These new user coach or their user games they're faced. All these coaches are actually at new schools, so it could play to Buffalo advantage. Like you mentioned, that they do have their team established. They've had plenty of years to recruit their own players at this point, where all these three coaches are at brand new schools, so it's not quite their teams as of yet. They're having to take a previously built team and try to run with it. Talent-wise, though, each one of these three should have more talent on their roster than Buffalo. So it should be very interesting to see what Buffalo does in those user games. The MAC schedule, I think, is a little bit easier up front, and it's going to be a little bit tougher for them in the back, with Central Michigan having a very stacked roster thanks to the recruiting by Coach Butch Green. And Bowling Green, like you mentioned, has been a tough team. And Akron has not finished top in their conference, but has at some points given Buffalo some issues. So this could be tough for Buffalo. We got to see how those recruits that haven't been playing as of yet are coming in behind Cousins. He's been the established quarterback there, and we'll see if the rest of those pieces can fill in to help them get to where they were this past season. I don't see Buffalo doing any better than what they did this year. I don't know if they have enough talent yet to be better, but I do think that a similar season to last season is something very achievable for this Buffalo team.
Yeah, that moves us into the next school on the list. That is the Duke Blue Devils, coached by my compatriot here on the broadcast, Coach Silent Storm. Last season, Duke struggled in his first season with the team. They got off to a rocky start after an opening week win against Wisconsin, and then had a bit of a losing streak before rebounding in the back half of the season with a few big wins, none larger than the season finale against arch rival UNC. A thrilling comeback there, and they played a couple of teams close that they ended up losing to. So some promising signs towards the back half of the schedule for Duke last season. We'll see if they can carry that momentum into this year. They're going to be tested right away out of the blocks in week 2 against Florida State. They get them at home, but the Seminoles, a superior roster and a team that they probably will struggle with. They have the potential to beat them, but it's going to take a near-perfect game. Then they have an interesting matchup on the road at Fresno State. That'll be a bit of a homecoming, Coach.
Yeah, can't wait for that one. I'll be excited to kind of be back there in Fresno and be back in the old stadium and play. I mean, that team is, at this point, mostly my players. So these are, guys that I recruited, brought into that program. So it'll be a fun one for sure to go back there and play the Dogs.
Yeah, after that, it's the game against Mississippi State, where Mississippi State, led by Coach R. Bark, will make the trip up to Durham. And that'll be an exciting user game. Mississippi State, with a slightly superior roster, could be challenging, but maybe the home field advantage will be enough. They'll get a bye week after that, and then it'll be another user game in West Virginia, and that'll be on the road, and that'll be a chance at a little bit of revenge. Last season, Duke met Utah, and it was a challenging affair. There were a couple of hiccups involved in that game. So this is an opportunity here for Duke possibly to exact a little bit of revenge on the road at a team that is with a new coach, with a roster that he's still going to be getting used to at that point, and is maybe not necessarily the roster that he would prefer. So that'll be an interesting game there in week 6. Then into ACC play, Virginia was a top 25 team last year. That'll be tough, but they do get them at home. Miami, obviously, always a good roster. They have struggled recently, but still have plenty of talent in their silos. And then Georgia Tech, who Duke nearly beat last year, had a close game. They'll get them at home this time, so that could make a difference. And following that, Virginia Tech, who's also, like Miami, similarly struggled recently, but again, they have great personnel. And so both that Miami and Virginia Tech game will be on the road. Those will be interesting games to see if those two schools still struggle, to see if Duke can take advantage of it, or if they rebound and make those especially difficult road games. They follow those games with a home date against the defending national champions, my Syracuse Orange, and then close out with Pittsburgh and then arch rival North Carolina. So looking at the ACC slate, it's kind of alternating between difficult and not as difficult almost on a week-to-week basis.
Yes, I would agree with that. It's don't want to get too much into it being my own team because, of course, I'm going to be a little bit biased. But I would agree with that statement. Louisville has not been as strong of a team, and then you go bounce back against Virginia, who is had a really good roster, and then you said they finished top 25. Then you have Miami, who struggled, but also is a loaded roster. Then there was Georgia Tech, who was the Coastal champion last year to go to the ACC championship. Then Virginia Tech was at the bottom of the Coastal, but a good roster. Then obviously against your Orange, that's the best team in the ACC. Then Pittsburgh is a bottom feeder. That was actually one of our only two wins in the ACC. And, of course, then North Carolina, who has a good roster, but a rivalry game, you never know what you expect, we saw last year. So it's really exciting. I can't wait to get into this season and the conference play. This year, I think we've done a complete rehaul of the offense. So we're excited, a brand new playbook to the team that we're going to be implementing this season. So we're really excited to see if that change can help us moving forward. So this is going to take us into our next team. This is a team that has had really good rosters. Had a better year last year than the year before. They had a really hot start to start the season and kind of fell off in the back half of the season with the Hoosiers. They were mentioning they have that gauntlet in the back that we'll talk about when we get there. But they start the season, of course, with that amazing Tar Heel Bowl. The user game, it's going to be at Washington. That is always an exciting game, and it's definitely one that you're going to want to catch. It has been decided by a single score each year, so that one is going to be really awesome. Then they follow that on the road again against the 17th ranked TCU, then a user home game in West Virginia. Then they're going to get into that Big Ten play where they are going to face Purdue on the road, and then a 21 ranked Nebraska team. And then they get the user game. Coach Blitzkrieg, his first year in the Big Ten, he's actually on the opposite side of Indiana, but he will face him very first season. They're week 6. And Indiana's going to have those 2 straight bye weeks. And this is not the very beginning of the gauntlet, but this is when it kind of gets tough for Indiana. They play a rivalry. Okay.
Games and then 2 bye weeks and then 6 games.
Yeah, it's true. It's like having 2 seasons for them. It's kind of broken up very nice there to where they kind of can go through those first 6 weeks, see how they've done, because they do play good opponents. Obviously, Washington's good, TCU is good. The West Virginia user games are always going to be good. So there's lots of good there. So it's a good chance to get those 2 weeks to kind of check how they've done, review film, kind of see how things are going and see if they need to make any adjustments. Because like we said with this Indiana team, this back half, this gauntlet of theirs has been a nightmare for them. I will let you go into detail of those last 3 games more, but in a second. But obviously they're going to play 24th ranked Michigan State in a rivalry game. Then they're going to be playing home against Rutgers, so they've done pretty well against them. But last year, these next 4 games, they actually lost all 4 of these in a row. Maryland had a good team last year, and that beat them. And they're playing all 3 of these next opponents all on the road at Maryland, at number 3 Michigan, and at number 4 Ohio State. And then they're going to finish off with that home game against Penn State.
Yeah, Maryland had a great roster last year and ended up making a high-quality bowl. They were actually in the Citrus Bowl against Mississippi State. So they finished high in both the rankings and the Big Ten standings to get that prestigious bowl. But I believe that they were a little bit senior heavy last year. I think Maryland might be back more towards down to earth. He does get them on the road. But those last three games, on the road, Michigan, on the road, Ohio State, and home against Penn State, those three games in the 6 seasons that Coach Seawack has been at Indiana, in the 6 seasons, in those 3 games, Indiana's record against those 3 opponents is 2-16. So definitely the gauntlet there for Indiana, and some difficult tests. They have never beaten Michigan. They've beaten Ohio State once, and they've beaten Penn State once. And this year, Michigan and Ohio State are on the road, making them even more difficult. And they're 3rd and 4th, so it looks like they are, once again, power players nationally, with excellent rosters, I'm sure. And it's going to be difficult for Indiana. They managed to make a good bowl last year. This year, I think, given that there's some difficult games in the first 6 games, and there's certainly some difficult games in the last 6 games, they're going to absolutely have to win all the winnable games. They have to beat Purdue, they have to beat Rutgers, they have to beat Maryland, they have to beat Michigan State, and then the rest of the chips fall where they may for them to be able to go bowling. I know that they want to contend for the Big Ten title, but until proven otherwise, the record speaks for itself. 2-16 in those last 3 games. If they want to contend for the Big Ten title, they're going to have to get past that hurdle. And so far, we haven't seen it. That takes us into the next team on the list. That is the Minnesota Golden Gophers. As mentioned, they open in Chicago, facing off against Buffalo. We talked about that game earlier. And then they follow that with another user game on the road in Morgantown, taking on a fellow new coach, a new rival at his university, Coach Brack's West Virginia Mountaineers. And then a home game where they welcome their former team, Central Michigan, ranked 7th, built up by Blitzkrieg, will be paying a visit to Minneapolis to take on the Golden Gophers. That'll be an interesting matchup, one that I will want to watch very closely. And then Big Ten play gets off with a bang. On the road in Columbus at the Horseshoe, followed by Rutgers, and then on the road at fellow user Indiana, Coach Seawack's Indiana Hoosiers in week 6. Then a bye week, and then number 10th Northwestern. Northwestern has been a national player over the last few seasons. Had a little bit of a hiccup last year for their standards. They were not a top 10 team last year, but it looks like they may be back. They're 10th in the preseason polls. Then a bye week, and then winnable games against Iowa and Illinois. On the road at Western Division winning Nebraska. Last season they won the West. And then Purdue and Wisconsin. So looking at this schedule, Coach Blitzkrieg has enjoyed some very successful seasons at Central Michigan, some 8, 9, 10, 11 win seasons. I doubt that's happening this year. I think looking at this schedule, Central Michigan is not Minnesota. It's a rebuilding process in Minnesota, and with the Central Michigan game, with Ohio State and Nebraska and Northwestern, and the Indiana Hoosiers, I think making just a bowl game would be quite the achievement, and I think that might still yet be a little bit out of reach this season. I'd be surprised if Minnesota makes it to 500.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a challenge for them, knowing firsthand what it's like to have a team that you went bowling with. Because in my first 3 seasons at Fresno State, we went bowling each year and thought that, going to the Power 5, I could do the same thing. And it's an eye-opener. When you play that good talent every single week, not just out of conference, and then when you get into conference and you're having to play those talented teams, it's a lot harder to achieve that goal. So I would agree with you. I would not be shocked if we did not see Minnesota in the postseason this year, especially with some of these games that they have on the schedule. He's got, playing his former team. That team is stacked. It's going to be better than the team he has now currently. Those user games are just completely unpredictable, so you never know what's going to happen there. And then, what a way to get introduced to the Big Ten on the road against Ohio State, going to the shoe. That to me, that is definitely a welcome to the Big Ten right there. And then it really doesn't get much easier after that. It'll be tough. They're really going to have to play perfect football, I think, to be any sort of a contender in their conference. And like we mentioned with Indiana, if Minnesota wants to go bowling, the winnable games they absolutely have to win because they have plenty of games that are going to be really tough for them. Which is going to now lead us to our next team on tap, Mississippi State. They're coming into this season after 2 really good years. Coach R. Bark has kind of gone outside of that whole being at a new team and struggling. His first 2 seasons at Mississippi State went bowling and did not pretty good, actually. A lot better than probably most people would have expected. But he's definitely got these Mississippi State Bulldogs trending in the right direction, starting the season off ranked 13. They will have a bye week 1. Then they're going to open up SEC play right off the bat with 2 games, home against Missouri, who Missouri has been just god-awful the past few years. So definitely a winnable game there. But then they go on the road against Auburn, and they're going to follow that with a road game against a user in my Duke Blue Devils. And then that game that has been tough for them, they played that game so close each year, is against number 8 LSU. Then going to be a tough game following that as well in a user game home against currently number 1 ranked Navy. Then they got 2 straight away games in Tennessee and Florida. Then a bye week. Then they're on the road against, and this is where the schedule I think is going to get real tough for them. On the road against Texas A&M. They got the home game in the Barker Bowl, the brothers battling it out. He gets that home against 16th Washington. Then one of their rivalry games that has given Mississippi State trouble the last 2 years. Coach Arbark has been there. Alabama has just blown him out both times they face each other. Then he plays Arkansas home, and then what we can't wait for, that Week 14 user rivalry game to end that season.
Ole Miss and Mississippi State gained a lot of prestige. That'll be an exciting affair, as will the Barker Bowl. I'm looking forward to that Navy Mississippi State game. I think that's going to be a good matchup. That'll be taking place in Starkville. Tennessee beat Mississippi State 2 years ago in Knoxville. He beat them. He got revenge last year, wiped the floor with them. But now it's a return trip to Knoxville. That'll be interesting. Obviously, the road game against Florida, interesting. Texas A&M down a little bit, so that may be a winnable road game there. And then, the last 3 of the last 4, Washington, Alabama, and Ole Miss, promising to be exciting games there for the Bulldogs. That does take us into the Navy Midshipmen, currently ranked number 1 in the country in the preseason polls. They finished second in the polls last year, led by freshman phenom Peter Moss at quarterback. And this year, they start the season in the top spot. That gives us a marquee matchup in Week 1 at MetLife Stadium.
Yeah, that is a big-time matchup there. Week 1, we get the 1 versus 2 right off the bat. Cannot wait for that game to happen. Obviously, between my co-companion here right now, his Syracuse Orange taking on these number 1 ranked Navy midshipmen. It's going to be an exciting game. I cannot wait for that one. Whenever that game is announced, when we get our official start time, I actually will be commentating that one. So I cannot wait for that. It's gonna be super exciting. You'll be hearing my voice, taking care of the commentating for that game. So big time game there, Week 1.
Yeah, take us through the rest of the Navy schedule there, Coach.
Yeah, so right after that, it doesn't really get easier for them. So after they play the defending 4-time national champs at a neutral site game, they do get a home game, but it is against the 16th ranked Washington Huskies. So not much forgiveness right after a tough game week 1. They're going to have another tough game week 2. Then they get a bye week. Then they're going to be playing home against Marshall. And then they're going to be playing a USF team that had a phenomenal running back, but I do believe he graduated this past year, so we'll see how that USF team is. But they are starting the season ranked number 20, and this is a team that dominated Navy last year, so we'll see what happens this year. And then they go on the road against 13th ranked Mississippi State in another user game. So that the front half of the season, the first 6 weeks, pretty tough games. I mean, I don't know how well Marshall will be. They could be a challenge for Navy, but really those other games, all of them are going to be a severe challenge, I think, for Navy. This is a really, really good Navy team. Coach Six Gun Ninja has done a phenomenal job recruiting, building this team up. But, of course, you say 3 of those games are user games. Obviously against the 4-time national champion Mississippi State, who's been trending definitely up, so those should be challenging. Any user game is going to be a challenge. And then of the other 2 games, USF did handle this Navy team, so pretty tough. Yeah, so then you got the first 6 games is games that are going to be tough for the midshipmen. Then they're going to follow that up with a road game, week 7 against Southern Miss, then on the road against Temple. Then home against Tulsa. Then they're going to go 2 straight bye weeks. And then the game that has always been a challenge for the Navy midshipmen, that rivalry game against number 22 ranked SMU. No matter what SMU is ranked, unranked, this game has always been a challenge for Navy because any rivalry game, if teams come to play. Then they're going to be on the road against Tulane, on the road against Memphis, and then, of course, America's game, the Army versus Navy game, to finish the season.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting. Coach Six Gun Ninja, always very good about controlling the margin, and some of his games, that he wins against unranked teams may be close, but the scoreline really not indicative of the fact that maybe Navy was in control the entire time. And then, obviously last season with losses to Marshall and USF, he'll be wanting to get revenge. He's got both of them at home this year. That could make a big difference. And the user games, all user games are always challenging. But certainly, he has 3 ranked user teams. So that'll be challenging, as well as, Army has had a fantastic program the last few years. They seem to be getting better and better. And that's, of course, a huge rivalry game. So it'll be interesting to see. If I were a betting man, I would bet the trends. I would say that Coach Ninja he's going to put himself in good positions, and he's going to give himself a chance. I won't make any predictions on records. He is a superstitious man, and therefore I won't make any judgment calls on whether or not he's going to win or lose specific games. I will just simply say that, once again, if I were a betting man, that I think that he will be well prepared, and we'll just have to see how it all sorts out. That takes us into the Ole Miss Rebels. Ole Miss with their new head coach, Silent Hawk. And we mentioned earlier, with the new head coach, Blitzkrieg at Minnesota, getting welcomed into the Big Ten. Certainly a welcome party there in week 1 against Georgia. Georgia, always a very tough roster. They had a little hiccup last season, but they've consistently been in the top 25 otherwise. And I'm sure once again they are reloaded and ready to go. Week 2 on the road at Syracuse, number 2 Syracuse. Now, Coach Silent Hawk gave the Orange quite the game last season with Hawaii, and it'll be interesting to see if he's able to do the same with Ole Miss. I'm sure that'll be an exciting affair. Following that, on the road at number 19 South Carolina, a winnable game against Vanderbilt, and then to Tuscaloosa they go against Alabama, who might be a little miffed to be unranked. The bye week follows with a home date against the struggling A&M Aggies, and then a road date in Death Valley against LSU, at home against the number 23 ranked Army Black Knights, West Point, that academy offense, always challenging for Coach Silent Hawk, but he does get them at home, so that'll be an interesting affair. Week 10, that user game at Buffalo, and then following that, struggling Arkansas at home, a bye week before finishing with 2 tough games at Auburn and at home to Mississippi State in that Egg Bowl that we talked about earlier that everyone is circling on their calendars.
Yeah, this is like we mentioned with the Minnesota coach getting a welcome to the Big Ten. You are absolutely right. Ole Miss and Coach Silent Hawk getting a welcome to the SEC, playing the Dogs there week 1. Definitely a really tough, like I mentioned with Navy, a really tough beginning to their schedule. Outside the Vanderbilt game, which is, like you mentioned, a very winnable game for them, they have to play the Bulldogs, Georgia Bulldogs, which we know has a very good roster. They recruit well year in, year out. Obviously, the road game against the 4-time defending national champ. Then a road game against 19th ranked South Carolina, then the winnable game, and then at Alabama. Those are going to be tough. So it definitely gets a very good welcome to the SEC with Georgia at South Carolina and at Alabama. I mean, and it doesn't get any easier after that. I mean, I really like. I can't. The games I have highlighted for me is definitely going to be that Syracuse. They're welcome to the SEC game against Georgia. The Syracuse game. We're going to see how they do against Alabama. That at Death Valley is, I think, going to be a big one. I like that Army game because, like you mentioned, Coach Silent Hawk struggles with that military academy style offense. And then I would say that last game of the season, week 14, the Egg Bowl, the user rivalry game, that one's going to be, I think, going to be really exciting. I can't wait to see what he can do with this team in his first year here. Could be something similar to UC Minnesota, to where playing the tougher talent week in and week out could make them maybe miss a bowl. But just like Minnesota, I think that it's achievable, but I would not be surprised if they don't make it to a bowl game this season, in their first year. So this is going to lead us into our next team, which, of course, I'm going to be taking the main reins because I'm not going to let you brag about your team too much, Coach. But we got the second-ranked Syracuse Orange, our 4-time national defending title champions. First in League One history to ever have a coach win 4 in a row. And the Orange are going to start off their campaign for a 5th in a row with, like we mentioned before, a tough neutral site game at MetLife against a number 1 ranked Navy midshipman. So looking forward for that one. Then they're going to have a home game against another user in Ole Miss, like mentioned before, with Coach Silent Hawk at Hawaii made it a tough game. So we'll see what he can do with a better roster if he can do something similar. Then 2 straight bye weeks for the Orange. Then they're going to have a very tough home game against the 3rd-ranked Michigan Wolverines. Then a rivalry game that has not been much of a rivalry in the past few years at Pittsburgh. Then they're going to be playing North Carolina on the road against Louisville. Then the 2 toughest games which have been the 2 toughest, I would say, for the Syracuse. The only 2 teams that have come close to contention in the Atlantic, home against Florida State and at Clemson. Those 2 teams have been the only 2, really, I think, in the past few years that have been able to give the Orange any sort of a challenge for the Atlantic, especially Florida State. The last 2 years, they've pushed Syracuse all the way to the very end. So that's an exciting one, I would think. But they do get them at home, so that's hopefully can play to advantage. But when they had them at home 2 years ago, Florida State did push that game all the way to the end as well. So that's a big one I'd have circled there mid-season for the Orange. Then in the back half, based off of what you've seen the teams done last year, not really much of trouble for the Orange, as they have a rivalry game against Boston College, which, just like Pitt, has been not much of a rivalry game at all. Then a user game on the road against Duke, which is myself. So we'll be playing each other. So that one, user games are unpredictable, so we'll see what happens there. And then at Wake Forest, and then home versus NC State. So tough. The front half tougher for Syracuse. And, of course, they have those 2 games in the middle that have been probably their most challenging Atlantic opponents. And then really outside of Duke, just because it's a user game, not too much of a challenge in the back half of their schedule.
3 games are going to be really tough. Navy, obviously, an excellent program there with Coach Six Gun Ninja. And as mentioned before, Coach Silent Hawk gave Syracuse a hell of a game last season. This year, he has a slightly better roster, and that will be, I'm sure, a very, very nip and tuck tough battle. Week 5, the rematch from last season's national title game. The Michigan Wolverines, always an excellent roster. So those first 3 games, we're going to find out an awful lot about Syracuse by the end of the 3rd game.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
That takes us into UW. Washington, led by Coach Sweetest Coin, finished ranked last year, starts this season ranked. They are number 16 in the preseason poll, and they will open the year at home against Indiana in the Tar Heel Bowl for the 9th consecutive season that these two have met in the regular season. Washington, Indiana, always a 1-score game, always exciting and thrilling. Last season, the game finished with Washington running out of time at about Indiana's 2-yard line. So if it's any indication of what might happen this year, definitely want to catch that one. Week 2, they are on the road in Annapolis at Navy Marine Corps Memorial Stadium to face off against Six Gun Ninja's Navy Midshipmen. That should be an excellent game. And then week 3 at home to number 5 USC. So the first 3 games here for UW, definitely challenging. We should find out an awful lot about them in their first 3 games. After that, they'll have 2 weeks to regroup before really diving into Pac-12 play. USC will be the opener, but week 6 they start out at Arizona State and then at number 12 Stanford. And Stanford has given Washington some trouble in the past, so that's one to circle. Home against Arizona, home against Cal, road game against former user team Utah. So we'll see if the recruits that Brack was able to bring in to the Utes will be enough to give Washington a contest. What will be a contest is the Barker Bowl there in week 11 against number 13 Mississippi State. 2 top 25 teams going head to head. These two gentlemen finished a 21-19 game last season and always play each other tough. They know each other quite well. And then the last 3 games, all rivalry games, home against number 6 Oregon State, and then on the road against Oregon, and at home in the Apple Cup against Wazoo. So Washington hoping to rebound. They won the Pac-12 title 3 seasons ago. They've had 2 seasons in the interim. One in which we had a health scare with Coach Sweetest Coin, and then last season where they just missed making the Pac-12 title game. So they're hoping to make a return to the Pac-12 championship game and hoping to contend for the conference. It'll be interesting to see whether or not they can check enough boxes to do so.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think it'll be definitely tough for them to do so. I know that Coach Sweetest Coin wants to get his Huskies back to the Pac-12 championship game. But it is going to be a tough one, especially with their opening Pac-12 game against number 5 USC. That should provide some challenge to them, as well as that Oregon State game, which last year Oregon State just thrashed this Huskies team. So we'll see what they do. The first 3 games of the season are tremendously tough for them. Like we mentioned, that Indiana game, the Tar Heel Bowl game, always a 1-score game. In their 9th meeting now, so the past 8 meetings have all been a 1-score game. And then, of course, on the road against number 1 Navy and home against 5th USC. That's going to be tough. I mean, if these guys – you could see them possibly be 3-0. You could see them be 0-3. I mean, all of those games, in my opinion, are toss-ups. They could win each one. They could lose each one. So they're going to get gut checked very early this season. They get those 2 straight bye weeks, and then they can kind of rebound and really get a good look at their team because they're going to be playing quality opponents the first 3 weeks to then push through the rest of that schedule. And the games that I've highlighted in the back half, obviously on the road against Stanford, the Barker Bowl game, And then those last two, the Oregon before Washington State. Washington State's roster has been very down, so shouldn't be too much of an issue, but, it's a rivalry game, so you never know. And then this is going to bring us into our last user schedule on tap here. Coach Brack and his West Virginia Mountaineers. He will start the season off on a bye, and then it will be followed by a user home game against Minnesota. And this is one of the only users, I believe, that has 3 straight user games in consecutive order. Now, we might have some users that are close to, maybe have a bye week in between here or there, but I believe this is the only user that's going to go back-to-back-to-back user games. And one of 2 users that have 4 user games, I believe, as he will take on a user in Minnesota at home, then 2 straight away games, Indiana on the road, then Buffalo on the road. Then they're going to have a home game against the 14th ranked Oklahoma Sooners, and then a home game against a user in Duke. So that's going to be a challenging start, a really challenging start, because, like we say anytime, user games are very unpredictable. They can really be won by any coach. And then the one game in between those is probably going to be the toughest team West Virginia is going to be playing out of the Big 12 in the 14th ranked Sooners. Then they're going to be playing at Texas Tech, a home game against Houston, at UCF, which was when the reset of the league started. This is where Coach Sweetest Coin started his career at UCF. So we'll see if they still provide any challenge, or if they still perform well. Then it's a bye week. Then they're home against Oklahoma State, at Iowa State, home versus Kansas State, and they finish off their regular season, at Kansas.
Yeah, this is a really front-loaded schedule, it looks like, for WVU. Those first 5 games, really the first 6 games, because Texas Tech has had an excellent offense the last several seasons. So they're going to be tested early with those 4 out of 5 user games in the front half. But if they can get through the first 6 games, say around 500 even, they can certainly contend for the Big 12 title in their first year. It'll be interesting to see that road game at UCF, that roster built up by Coach Sweetest Coin, as well as Iowa State winning the Big 12 last season. They made it to a BCS Bowl. The Iowa State Cyclones winning their first Big 12 title. And, they probably were senior heavy, would be my guess. I haven't taken a close look at them. So that may be a very winnable road game this year if they graduated a lot of people. But the last 4 games, Oklahoma State, Iowa State, Kansas State, and Kansas, that's where West Virginia is really going to have to make up for some ground that they may have lost in the front half.
And that is the season 18 official schedule release. We have all of the users' games listed there. You guys got to go through it, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce a third member of the team. We have another coach joining us here in the broadcast. We have another Coach Six Gun Ninja.
Thanks, Coach. It's a pleasure to be here. Looking at this schedule, I noticed a couple of things this season. One is that over and over again, we were looking at the first, 4 games, whether that took 4 weeks or 5 weeks or 6. The first 4 games of most of these schedules were the toughest for a lot of coaches. So we're going to have a really, really tough first third, and we're going to see a lot of things shake out in those first 6 weeks and find out a lot of information from that. Because it does seem like for myself and many other coaches that we've got a very, very tough, very front-loaded schedule for a lot of teams. In addition to that, we've got a number of double bye weeks this season. I saw at least 2 or 3, maybe even 4 double bye weeks when looking at this schedule. And One is unusual. One is, and for any given coach, a double bye week is challenging. You need to do something to keep yourself match fit, and you got to keep the timing. We've got a number of double bye weeks this season, and timing of routes and that sort of thing. That's a real reason to need to stay in shape and stay on the practice field in those weeks. The other thing is, of course, we've got a bunch of new coaches at their schools, and it looks like a lot of the coaches who have moved schools are competing with each other in the user games, which is going to be very very interesting. To see that all of those coaches at new schools competing with each other with rosters that they're not quite familiar with yet. And yeah, as we were saying, so of course the first game between number 1 and number 2 at neutral site is going to be tremendously interesting, tremendously important, and competitive game that we're looking forward to. But there's another interesting wrinkle to the Navy schedule. Normally, the Commander-in-Chief's trophy is determined by the best record between, a head-to-head record between Army, Navy, and Air Force. Because of our user game rules, we, Navy does not play Air Force on a regular basis ever since ECU. Coach Brack left ECU to join Utah, and we haven't had somebody in the American with us. But instead, Navy is playing both of the Barkers this year. So yes, there's going to be a head-to-head Barker Bowl, but there's something to be said for the three-way competition between who's going to be the best between Navy and Washington and Ole Miss, since we do all play each other. So a little bit of an honorary Barker Bowl bid for Navy this season. And I'd be interested to see in future seasons if we can arrange such things again, to see if somebody can beat both Barkers in a single year, or if both Barkers can beat a single person in the same year. I think it would be a tremendously interesting wrinkle to the league moving forward.
To tack on to your point, Coach, interestingly, I just double-checked. As far as the Commander-in-Chief's trophy goes, because of machinations during the schedule-making process, Air Force this particular season will play neither Army nor Navy. So the Commander-in-Chief's trophy being decided solely this year by the Army-Navy game.
Wow, that is unusual. That has not happened very often since the founding of the Air Force and the Air Force Academy in 1947.
Yeah, that'll be exciting. Cannot wait for this whole season to happen. I am just overjoyed that we're here in season 18. Can't wait to see all of these big user matchups we have, as well as many users in just games against CPU. A lot of the users have some challenging games and some very good CPU teams. We have can't wait to see our 3 new user coaches at their new schools. That'll be. It's always exciting to get that fresh start somewhere else. So excited to see what they do with it, and of course all the big rivalry games. Like Coach Spector mentioned, the Duke North Carolina game last year had quite an amazing finish, and so we're looking forward to seeing many of those games to come here in this 18th season of League One. Next thing we'll look at here is our conference outlook. And of course, we'll hop in, and it's going to start off with our first conference of the ACC. We'll start.
Yeah, taking a look at the entire ACC conference, they have Syracuse in first, Virginia in second, Clemson and Florida State in third and fourth. So 3 of the top 4 in the Atlantic Division, and Virginia, North Carolina, and Georgia Tech leading the charge for the Coastal Division. Duke currently picked to finish 11th in the conference. What are your thoughts on that, Coach?
Well, based off last season, I mean, you have to rightly put us down there. We finished 4-8 overall, 2-6 in the in conference play. So I'm not surprised to see us down that far. But I would like to hopefully we see if we can get finish better than that at the end of the season. But I mean, like I said, honestly, not surprised that we're starting so low after a 2-6 performance last year.
Is the Atlantic the tougher of the 2 divisions?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. You like you mentioned, 3 of the top 4 are from the Atlantic. Obviously, Syracuse, Clemson, Florida State. Clemson, Florida State, both those 2 teams blew us out last year. And then, of course, out of all the ACC opponents, Florida State's the only one to hold Syracuse to anywhere really close to anything. Clemson has done in the past, but last season specifically, they did not. They were blown out. But Florida State did give Syracuse a run for their money. So definitely have the better teams. Just the Coastal has been good at having great teams, just not winning enough games and then start to beat one another. Like if you look at Miami, it's good rosters. They just aren't winning enough games.
Yeah, the Coastal's been hurt by the downturn of both Miami and Virginia Tech.
Yeah, I would agree, and it looks as though when I quickly go through the Coastal, looks as though Virginia might have had a senior heavy team last year, and they might have taken a big dip. Sure. They took a major dip in overall ratings on offense, defense, and the total team overall.
And moving into the American Conference, if I look at the American Conference, I see Navy in first place, picked to finish first in the American Conference as a whole, with USF from the Eastern Division, and then SMU from the Western Division, Marshall from the Eastern, and those top 4 teams likely look to be the main contenders for the conference crown.
Oh, absolutely. They're all good teams, and they've all got excellent playbooks, excellent coaches. So we do expect those 4 to be very competitive as we face at least 2 of them this season. If not all 3, I can't remember.
No, in fact, you do face all 3, USF and Marshall, 2 of your 3 Eastern Division opponents this particular season, and of course SMU in intra-divisional play.
Yeah.
Southern Miss is 5th, although I suspect that they may fall into the category of having been senior heavy, but that remains to be seen. Memphis down a little bit over the last couple of years compared to their top 25 finishes earlier on in the dynasty. But Navy right now at the top of the standings. I know that everyone is 0-0, but what are you thinking about the American Conference? Its strengths and deficiencies this season.
Well, its strengths continue to be some of these teams like SMU and Marshall and USF that have a lot of explosiveness. The American, like the Mountain West, and like some of the other teams that punch above their traditional weight class, relies a lot on explosiveness on offense. You saw that when East Carolina won a couple of American conference titles in a row. You saw that with USF last year. Marshall and SMU are both famous for it. And so that's going to continue to be a thing. But of course, you see a higher proportion of academy and triple option offense in particularly the American West, with not only Navy but Southern Miss and Tulane also running triple option style offenses very frequently. So the American is a conference that has a lot of creativity on offense, and we'll see what that leads to and what that means, particularly for these top four teams. Which definitely, I mean, if you look at Navy 97 overall, USF 97 overall, SMU 95, Marshall 97, and then it drops precipitously down to Southern Miss, who is 86 and the best rated team out of the top four. So it's really like there's this is like the Premier League in soccer. There's a top four, and then there's everybody else. And Navy's one of the top four, and they play the other top three. So again, it's just like soccer.
Well, there's a couple teams at the bottom that I think other opponents, USF, SMU, Marshall, Navy, that they'll have to look out for as well.
Oh yeah.
ECU still has a pretty good roster with that 9-3 offense, like you said, the explosiveness. Temple with a 93 overall, 95 offense, and 90 defense, and Tulane.
Oh wow, they're on an upswing.
And yeah, as well as Tulane with the 90 overall, 93 offense. So
I didn't realize those three were so good. Both Temple and Tulane had excellent years last year, so it does make sense that they're doing well again.
Yeah, so I think the American Conference is actually looking up right now, looking pretty good to contend and fight against some of these other teams, saying that we might not be Power 5, but we can play with the best of them.
Absolutely.
Moving on to the Big 12 Conference, it is topped by Oklahoma, then TCU and Texas. So a very South Division heavy conference. You have to get down to fourth at UCF to find a Northern Division team. And of course, WVU, based on last season's performance and the fact that their roster is a little bit down, we see WVU led by Coach Brack down there in 9th position.
Not only that, but you also see Iowa State, who won the Big 12 last year, is rated in 6th place in the conference, which indicates a little bit of disrespect for the reigning conference champions.
Yeah, Oklahoma, Texas, obviously the traditional powers. We saw when we were reviewing Indiana's schedule that TCU is ranked 17th. And of course, UCF was recruited by User. So, the top four makes sense in that regard, roster strength-wise, and entirely possible, given the fact that Iowa State is an 86 overall with an 81 offense, that they themselves may have been a little senior heavy last year. And these standings reflect that. So definitely a South Division-driven conference. WVU has an opportunity there, being in the weaker of the two divisions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that definitely plays to their advantage of having the weaker of the two. There's still some good teams here, but really nothing like the South does. UCF looks like a dominating offense, but defense is probably going to be their Achilles heel, as you see the 99 offense, 83 defense. So a huge drop off between offense and defense. Houston is balanced at 90 across the boards, but then the rest of the teams, besides Iowa State's defense, are around that same level as West Virginia. So really Houston and UCF could pose a challenge. But UCF obviously just more on the offensive side. If you can get, it might be a team that if you can get a stop, like one stop, it could be enough to get you the win. And knowing traditional Big 12 games and how the Big 12 works, one stop could be enough in those kind of games.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Moving on to one of the top three conferences in the country, the Big Ten Conference. Looking at the Big Ten overall, what do you see, coaches?
Well, I mean, it is a series of traditional powerhouses with the losers of the national title game at the top of Michigan, followed by Ohio State, Northwestern, and Nebraska and Michigan State also, unsurprisingly well rated. But it's Northwestern and Indiana that are the surprises, really, in the top half of the Big Ten. Northwestern and Indiana. Only surprises in as much as they're doing unusually well for the last couple of seasons. Northwestern has had a Heisman candidate quarterback for a couple of seasons now. Indiana continues to have a really good team that is having a tough time breaking through the last 4 games of the season. But they're the ones that seem to consistently be floating right outside that traditional grouping. And of course, Minnesota down near the bottom, another new coach at a new school who's going to try and turn a program around, who's right now second to last in the Big Ten.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough conference. It's deserving of being one of the top 3, and like you say, obviously the 2 powerhouses, without question, being the top 2 with Michigan and Ohio State, and then Northwestern, who has been a dominant force in the Big Ten the past few seasons, would be the next team represented there. And then you got Nebraska up there as well. But there's a few teams here that I think people need to watch out for. We mentioned when we talked about the schedules last year, Duke was able to pull off a win over Wisconsin in the first week, but this Wisconsin team this year looks to be pretty stacked at a 97 overall, 99 offense, 95 defense. When we talk user specific, Minnesota predicted to be second to last in the whole Big Ten and also second to last in the West as well. I almost don't want to say it's fair to say they're in the easier side of the Big Ten, but they're still challenging. But they are, but it's still not going to be easy. Illinois, Purdue, and Iowa could pose some challenges, but those are winnable games. But I think Wisconsin, Nebraska, and Northwestern, those are going to be some pretty challenging games for Minnesota. But obviously Indiana, like we mentioned before, their gauntlet of Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, their side is just really stacked up. Maryland actually looking a little bit weaker than last year, and the Rutgers kind of looking to make a push to be almost as good as Maryland. So Indiana is going to have their work cut out for them again here in the Big Ten play.
Moving into Conference USA just for a quick second, we don't have any users there, but very quickly, Middle Tennessee State has been a dominant power. Old Dominion looking pretty strong as a 4-star 90-90-90 team. They have been successful in that conference. In fact, winning the conference in the 2017 season. Florida International, Rice, really, it's a 2-team conference. Once you get past the top 2, you can see why Conference USA has languished down towards the bottom of the conference power rankings, because Middle Tennessee State and Old Dominion are really the only 2 quality teams. And I would say, if I had to pick one, Old Dominion really should definitely win the conference this year.
Yeah, I think you're right. It is definitely a tale of those 2 teams, and I would put my money on Old Dominion as well.
Yeah, same goes for me. I would think that's the same thing. It's Old Dominion's conference to lose. The only little point I might say, Louisiana Tech projected to go to bottom, but their offense is a little bit better than most. So maybe they can make a push up, but I still don't think it'll be better than Old Dominion.
There's only 2 independents, that being the University of Notre Dame, Fighting Irish, who will start the season ranked 9th. They certainly can't be forgotten or overlooked. And the resurgent program up in West Point, the Army Black Knights, both of these schools and the independent teams Very, very competitive.
Yeah, well ranked Army with a team that was ranked going into the Army Navy game last season. An impressive run for the last couple of years as well.
And of course, Notre Dame, they are a national title contender, or at least they would like to think so, and their resume backs it up. I'm not sure what their schedule looks like this year, but they're a team that you overlook at your own risk.
Absolutely.
Going into the MAC, the MAC conference loses a user coach, but retains Buffalo, and obviously two teams now in the MAC between Central Michigan and Ohio, two of the top three rated teams, two of the top three ranked teams in conference contention, both having been built up by former user coaches. So it leaves kind of a difficult task there for Buffalo.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, both Central Michigan and Ohio are stacked. Bowling Green and Ball State are very good rosters with very good coaches in and of themselves. So Buffalo's definitely turned it around in the last couple of seasons, but it will continue to be an uphill slog for the Buffalo Bulls to compete against the likes of Central Michigan, Bowling Green, Ohio, and Ball State.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough challenge for Buffalo. They definitely have made some improvements. Offensive side of the ball, you see them have a higher rating than they have in the past. So I think they got enough pieces there to maybe make a push of some of these teams if they play good games. But obviously, Central Michigan, Bowling Green having to play both, actually, and Ohio playing all three of those schools, they're going to really have to bring their A game, play those to against those teams, pretty much be flawless to beat those teams. Ball State looks to actually be trending a little bit downward from what they were in the past. They seem to have better rosters than they do currently. And a sleeper team that has has been on the bottom, but I think could possibly make some noise. Akron looks to have a better roster than they've had in the past. That we mentioned before in the scheduling, they gave Buffalo some issues in some of their games, and their roster looks to improve. So maybe they can make a little bit of noise, maybe pull some upsets against some of these better teams.
Very well could do.
Yeah, moving on to the Mountain West, Air Force has been eminently successful over the past several seasons, finishing in the top 15 for consecutive seasons. But looking at their numbers, they look like they may have struck midnight on Cinderella's slipper. Air Force only an 81 overall this year. They start the season ranked 11th, but I wonder if they aren't headed for a disappointing season this year. Boise State, obviously a traditional power within that conference, but they too are looking very human. And in fact, I think you have to go all the way down to Fresno State in 7th. You want to talk about dark horses? Obviously, that program built up by Coach Silent Storm in previous years, and they have the highest rated team. Although Colorado State and San Diego State may have something to say in the conference race.
Yeah, this does look like it could be anyone's race for the first time in a little while, as clearly a number of cadets from the Air Force Academy have graduated into hopefully promising careers either in professional football or the U.S. Air Force, and it's going to give some of these other teams a chance. And it does look, you're absolutely right, like Fresno State, Colorado State, and some of these other schools could really have a puncher's chance at beating out some of the traditional powerhouses in the Mountain West, like Air Force, Boise, and Hawaii.
Yeah, that's been a trend of the Mountain West. These teams kind of have 2-3 good years. They surge. We saw that with New Mexico about 2 years ago, where they had an elite program and then just took a drastic turn downwards after a few years, and now they're trying to build their program back up. And UNLV had some good years, and I believe they dropped drastically one year as well. And now Air Force has turned up to that, to where this was a team that was like in the high 90s and just took a tremendous drop down. And I agree. Fresno State could be a team that makes that push later in the year, having probably the best overall roster. I mean, you do see some good numbers from Colorado State, offensively a little better than Fresno State, but defensively not as good. So it could be a Fresno State team. But of course, due to playing my Duke Blue Devils, we'll actually get to look a live look at Fresno State and see how that team plays on the field.
Moving into the toughest division in college football today, the number one ranked conference this year and a consistent top three performer, the Pac-12.
Yeah, you see the Pac-12 is going to have USC starting off ranked number one there with their 99 across the board, followed by Oregon State. USC is ranked fifth. Oregon State's ranked sixth. And they have looked to have a stacked roster as well. Stanford at 12 with a stacked roster. UCLA at 15 with a stacked roster. And, of course, Washington at 16 with a pretty good roster as well. And of those top five, I mean, they're all got good teams coming there. And you have their top five teams in the top 16. So that is obviously a true testament to how well this Pac-12 has been, how they've been playing. And
I think this conference pretty much goes 9 deep. If you look at the numbers, there's a lot of solidity pretty deep down the list here.
Yeah, they so far seem like the deepest conference. I mean, we still have 2 more to go. Only really one that has could have a say. But yeah, they go deep. These teams might not be ranked, but they might not be far from being ranked, or could be becoming ranked as that season progresses. Because you're true, the Arizona State roster right behind Washington in the ranking or in the Pac-12 conference outlook, but have a good roster. Arizona 93 across the board. The Utah Utes, previously user-led coach, has a good roster there as well. And then, of course, Oregon, disappointing season last year, but looks to have a good roster to hope to rebound. California looking good. Colorado looks good. I mean, it's really just Washington State. You can almost say 11 deep. This is a solid conference, just really outside of Washington State.
Yeah, and I mean, we'll see how it shakes out. But I would also expect, given what we're seeing, not only from the Stanfords and USCs, but that the Pac-12s, I would expect to do quite well in non-conference play. These teams up against teams from any of the mid-majors, and even a lot of teams from the major conferences, I would expect a lot of wins for the Pac-12 in non-conference play.
Yeah, you mentioned, Coach Silent Storm, the other conference that might have a say in which conference is best. That brings us to the SEC. And we see a user there rated second in the conference in the initial prognostications. But it's convenient that they come up next. What's the SEC look like? And then in addition, what does it look like compared to the Pac-12 for conference supremacy?
See, so first thing I'd like to say, everybody likes to talk about the SEC West and East, and obviously SEC West has the reputation of being one of the toughest divisions in all of college football, and it does prove somewhat true with LSU, Mississippi State being number 1 and 2, both LSU and Mississippi State being in the West. But then the next 3 teams are coming actually from the East, and then you have 2 West and then another East team. So I mean, it's the top 8. It's pretty much 4 and 4. So I can't argue with one side really being better than the other. But LSU, it's finishing. It's right now 1 with the stacked roster. Mississippi State 2. South Carolina has got a really good roster. Tennessee's roster looks good. I mean, these guys. The problem with them right now is because Alabama and Auburn and Georgia all had really down years last year. If you look at their rosters, they're absolutely loaded. So those are all 3 teams that I think will 100%, in my opinion, I think will, unless they just have some fluky games, should definitely see them crack the top 25. So to start the season, yes, I would say the Pac-12 looks to be better because they have more teams ranked in the top 10, or not top 10, top 25. But going down, I mean, you have to go all the way down to their, 19, Texas A&M. I mean, they're still 90 overall offense, but just to get out of the 90s, and overall in the 90s, you have to go all the way down to their 19. And then even right behind them, Arkansas's got a 90 overall. So really just, I mean, it would be, for me, it's a toss-up. You could go either way. You'd have to say, in my opinion, you'd have to go Pac-12's better because they have more ranked in the top 25 currently. But I would not be surprised if you see the SEC at the end of this season have a better outlook than the Pac-12 does.
It very well could, and I mean, going down to the 9th to find the first guy below 90, it was pretty similar to the way the Pac-12 looked. And really, looking at the Pac-12, just like the SEC, there's really only one outlier at the bottom that is really quite a team that is much worse than the rest, and that's Missouri. Vanderbilt is significantly worse probably than a lot of the other teams, but they're not nearly as different as Missouri is. Ole Miss, Kentucky, Vanderbilt, Texas A&M are probably just as competitive within the SEC as as some of the bottom half, like ASU and Colorado State are in the Pac. So it could be very interesting.
What does this say about Ole Miss? I'm looking at them being an 84 overall. Obviously, Coach Silent Hawk, an excellent coach. He took Hawaii to heights previously not seen in League1 in over 10 seasons. What are we thinking about Ole Miss? Now that we're identifying all of the talent in the SEC, we already knew the SEC was good, but it seems like it's been just now brought into clearer focus how good the SEC really is. So, knowing what we know about Coach Silent Hawk, what are the thoughts there?
I expect a lot of shootouts.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I would definitely expect a lot of shootouts for him because he's obviously a very offensive-minded coach. It's true. We've seen, I believe, 2 other users try to partake in the Hawaii rebuild and try to push them up, and I don't think either one had any success there and would love to forget their times at Hawaii. But Coach Silent Hawk went there, had one bad season, and the next 2 seasons, I believe, put up to at least 10 wins in both those seasons and took them to Mountain West Conference Championships. And in this last year, this past one, won the Mountain West over a really good Air Force team. So maybe could see a similar thing here. Might not be able to get that good 10-win season right off the first year because he's going to have to get used to playing those stacked opponents every single week. But it could be next season after he gets a recruiting class under his belt, or under one of his recruiting classes under his belt, and figures out his team and kind of gets a feel for how these other teams play. That he could be making an immediate impact after one season at Ole Miss.
It is a real possibility.
That leaves us with the Sun Belt. And again, very quickly, obviously built up by Coach R. Bark and ranked 18th. There is a standout team that one would expect would absolutely ravage and dominate this conference. Looking down the list, there are some of the worst teams in the country, such as Coastal Carolina and University of Louisiana Monroe. Some of the worst rosters in the country reside in this conference, but Appalachian State is not one of them.
No, not by a long shot. They outpace all of these teams and should run away with the Sun Belt quite handily.
Yeah, I don't see anybody else beating Appalachian State in the conference. I'd expect them to go undefeated in conference play because this is a team that could probably hang with some of the big dogs in Power 5 conferences. I mean, they actually have a better roster than, like we mentioned, those two bottom feeders, Washington State, Missouri. I mean, I could see Appalachian playing those guys and handling them very easily. So, yeah, this is their conference to lose. I would be utterly shocked to not see Appalachian State win another Sun Belt conference championship.
So that does it for our conference outlooks. Moving into preseason polls, if we take a look, the media poll does not come out until week 4. So the only poll that we have available to us is the coaches poll. And let's take a look here at season 18's preseason coaches poll.
Yeah, you see the top 10 right off the bat on the screen, and top 10 in the coaches poll. You have Navy there as the number 1, receiving 32 first place votes. Syracuse at number 2 with 22 first place votes. Michigan 3 with 1. Ohio State comes in 4th with 4 first place votes. USC 5th with 1. Oregon State in 6th with 1. Then Central Michigan 7, LSU 8, Notre Dame 9, Northwestern 10.
So, I mean, obviously, as the head coach of Navy and as a consummate pessimist myself, I am very surprised that Navy has 32 first place votes, even after finishing second place last year. So I think that's very interesting, and I think it's telling how close that actually is. There's, only 54 votes split between the two teams, and everybody else is in single digits. But the other thing I think that's really interesting is how close that Michigan is to both Syracuse and Navy, and the fact that Michigan got 1 first place vote, but apparently all of the second place votes to be the hands down everybody's number 3, except for the one person who voted them number 1. Like they clearly got a ton of second and third place votes in order to be that close and be, almost 70 points higher than Ohio State in 4th place. They're not closer to first place than they are to 4th place, but they're closer to being in second than they are to being in 4th. Michigan is, which is really, I think, quite interesting.
What I think is very interesting too, and this is not to be disrespectful to Navy at all. They have done an amazing job. Coach 600 Ninja done a phenomenal job recruiting and building that up. I just think Syracuse keeps getting disrespected. I mean, year in and year out, year in and year out, they've won 4 national titles, and I mean, I could be wrong, but they continuously come in here not ranked number 1, and I'm just baffled that other coaches continuously don't put Syracuse at 1. Where he continues to bring top-level talent in, winning national titles, and apparently that's not enough to start the season number 1. I mean, last season, I know he spent most of the year not ranked
at number 2.
1. Exactly, number 2, and was a 3-peat national title, has won 50-something straight games, but for whatever reason, the other coaches just, I guess they're envious, they're jealous, they just don't want to give him first place.
So I think it's a couple of things. I think it's, the perennial thing of like the thing that is new getting more votes. Navy being a top 5 thing is new and crazy. Syracuse, being a top 3 team, a top 2 team, well, they've won 4 in a row. Like it's there's some novelty votes, I think, being thrown Navy's way. I also think that to a certain extent, this might be like the NFL Coach of the Year award. The NFL Coach of the Year award, every year, yeah, you've got some absolute standout coaches who absolutely deserve it. But when you look around in some year where you haven't said, what that guy did with that team, what Harbaugh did with the Ravens this year, totally rebuilding them from ground up as an entirely different offense. Like that's the kind of thing. Like, okay, yeah, that's a huge coaching moment. That's a huge coaching innovation. Like that's Coach of the Year. But in a lot of other years where you don't have that, you look around and who's the consistently winningest? If the metric is wins, who's the winningest coach in the NFL? And it's Bill Belichick. but he does not win Coach of the Year hardly ever, because for the same reason that Syracuse, despite having 4 national titles in a row, hardly gets the ranking respect that they deserve, because people expect them to perform at that level, and it's not surprising to them when they do, so they don't get enough respect, as you're saying. I absolutely agree. I think Syracuse is disrespected in this poll. Even though Navy is my team, I absolutely think my vote in the coaches poll was not for Navy. It was for Syracuse.
Same with mine. I put Syracuse number 1. There you go, Coach Spector. You got the comparison to a great and Bill Belichick. So I think that's definitely a major compliment there.
Well, I think in both cases, whether it's the NFL Coach of the Year or the preseason top 25, I think there is a predilection to say, okay, well, how much are they punching above their weight? In terms of Coach of the Year, how many extra wins was this coach worth? And to this point, the consistency and longevity of the Patriots' success is a detriment to Belichick's ability to win the award, simply because people say, well, of course he won. He's expected to win because he has such a great team around him. Now, he had quite the hand in building that team year in and year out, and in maintaining that consistency. But I think that Coach of the Year, I think that, the sexy pick, if you will, is a lot about, hey, like this team's really hot. Or in the NFL's case, hey, this coach did more with less. So I think there's some, valuation difference, and there's a different way to approach it. And some people fall in one camp and some people fall in the other. But I'm happy to have the bulletin board fodder. I'm happy to have the motivation for the team, and we're clearly, we got more work to do, and we're just going to have to keep trying to get better.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll see. Obviously, with that week 1 matchup, we'll see who's going to be number 1.
Yeah, that ranking
soon.
might not last long.
Yeah, it'll be decided week 1 who will be number 1. We will know that very soon. So we
appropriately, and I'm excited about the fact that it is at a neutral site. I wouldn't want it any other way.
Indeed, I agree. I think it's going to be great, and it's going to be at a great location. Sort of halfway between the two in the Meadowlands in New Jersey.
Oh yeah, I'm excited for that one. I can't wait for that one. So if we go look at the next 10. We're starting here at number 11. You see Air Force starting ranked there at number 11, which I don't think will hold up. Stanford at 12. Mississippi State 13. Oklahoma 14. UCLA at 15. Washington 16. TCU at 17. Appalachian State at 18. South Carolina 19. And USF at number 20.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Air Force is headed for a quick downturn. I don't think that'll last very long at all.
I agree.
Stanford always interesting. The difference between how the playbook handles games that we don't see, and it's kind of hit or miss there. Some years they do well, some years they don't. That will be interesting in that regard. Obviously, the two users in Mississippi State and Washington have their own destiny in their hands. Oklahoma, they have Texas to contend with, as well as TCU. That'll be between the three of them. Texas unranked, but between Oklahoma, TCU, and Texas, that battle for the Big 12 South will have a huge say in the rankings. UCLA, indicative of the Pac-12 strength, they have been consistent over the last 2 seasons. We just mentioned a little bit ago that that all 3 of us expect that App State will dominate their conference. That will give them 8 wins. And then how they do in non-conference, they should be in the top 25 for almost the entire season, I would think. North Carolina and USF, both teams that aren't quite at the apex of their conferences, although USF did win the American last year. They're teams that should be able to maintain top 25 rankings.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think those teams definitely will probably stay in the top 25. I quickly looked at Appalachian State's schedule. I mean, the only tough games they play looks as though they play Arizona State, but it's at home. They play Cal at home, and they play Army at home. With a very interesting schedule for them. They actually play 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 straight home games, and then 5 straight away games. So very peculiar schedule set for them there. But yeah, really just Army, Cal, and Arizona State.
Am I wrong? Am I thinking of a different team, or is Texas State non-conference as well?
No, Texas State is conference. That's
okay,
Sunday.
Must have been thinking of Texas Tech or North Texas.
But App State, their non-conference games, all the difficult ones are at home.
I see GSU twice here. Are there 2 GSUs?
There's Georgia Southern and Georgia State.
Okay. That was my confusion.
Yep.
App State has an excellent chance to go 11-1 or possibly, we see this sometimes where a team has the advantage of schedule and they go undefeated, and then they get the benefit of being undefeated. App State, definitely a team to watch this year.
Yeah, especially starting at 18, they definitely have the possibility, if they stay undefeated, could be one of those teams that sneak their way definitely into BCS and might I say national title if they can stay undefeated, being already ranked 18.
That's how Air Force got into the national title that they fought against Syracuse a couple of years ago.
Yeah, very close fought battle, and we'll see how App State does. I think that's the most interesting in 11-20. And obviously, we'll get a big answer really early when Indiana takes on TCU in the first couple of weeks.
Yeah, and to round out the last bit of the top 25, you have Nebraska at 21, SMU at 22, Army at 23, Michigan State 24, and the last team in the top 25 to start the 18th season of League One is Bowling Green.
I would be hard pressed to not be able. I mean, well, let's put it this way: I could easily come up with an argument that 21 through 25, based on their performance last year, based on their historical performance, that 21 through 25 may, in fact, besides the 2 users, may in fact be collectively stronger than 11 through 20.
I can see that. I can absolutely see that, because I do think Bowling Green has a really good shot of performing similarly to Appalachian State, getting a lot of wins. Army West Point, I think, had 2 losses last year to Air Force and Navy. Michigan State is a team that will regularly have a hot year and bang out 9-10 wins. I can definitely see what you're saying about 21 through 25 there, as really all having chances to be better and more consistent than a lot of the guys in the second 10.
Yeah, I think that's a very true statement. This is pretty good teams here, with a couple of them having pretty favorable matchups. Army not having too many challenges in their schedule.
Well, they do have 2 teams.
Oh, they do.
Army
they do have some challenges. I mean, they won't have a perfect, easy season. They do play 2 user teams. They do play a previous user team in Hawaii. So, I mean, they still have some challenges.
And App State.
Yeah, and App State. So, it'll still be challenging for them, but a lot of their schedule is easier than the others that they like compared to Nebraska, SMU, Michigan State, Bowling Green. Of those ones, I think Michigan State would be the only one I think that Nebraska last year kind of had a stronger back half of the season, so maybe that compels them here. But Michigan State could be one that could be the one out of these 5 that could drop out. They were playing good last year and then kind of dropped at the end, so maybe trending back at the end of last year could affect them to start this year. We'll see. They're the out of those 5, they're the one I could see dropping out. Mostly just because of the competition they play. Bowling Green playing in the MAC, it could
it's not the Big Ten East in the MAC.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, I mean, the second toughest schedule would probably be Nebraska in the Big Ten West.
Yep, I would agree.
So, it'll be interesting to see. And Michigan State clearly, very much a dark horse in the Big Ten. But as you mentioned, Coach Ninja, Michigan State has proven that they have the capability, once every 3 or 4 years to make a run. And if this is the year, then, so be it. But, overall, looking at the top 25, a lot of talent. Obviously, they're top 25 teams. A fair amount of user representation. We had 6 users finish in the top 25 last year. This year we have 4 that start the season in the top 25. And I'm sure there are plenty of quality teams ranked 26th through 40th, certainly in the power conferences, that will have their say when it comes to some of our other users that are hovering just outside the polls. But looking at the top 25, I think it's for the most part fair, and it'll be really interesting to see, if we can look back at the end of the season, what the preseason top 25 is now versus what the final polls look like, and I will be interested to see whether or not our prognostications were on point or way off base. Both are eminently possible.
Indeed.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's some teams that I definitely think are some sleepers. We got some Power 5 teams that I think are just outside that could make some splashes later in the season.
That takes us to the preseason all NCAA teams.
Yes, and if you see, we got our all-American NCAA teams first team, and to no surprise, the quarterback is the returning Heisman winner, Fran Tarkenton out of Syracuse. And you have Ernest Biner, the first running back from Syracuse there, and then Cedric Ingram from Mid-Tennessee State representing there in the first team. 2 receivers, Fred Parsons of Colorado State and Darnell Kaysen from USC. Tight end, Brad Franz from San Jose State. And then on the offensive line, you have Luke Smith out of Michigan, Matt Keller from TCU, Scott Wallace out of USC, Nathan DeLoach from Alabama, and Jarrett Jackson from Texas. That is the offensive side of the ball for the All-American first team to start the season.
And on the defensive side, you see Washington. This is the second user team with a player of Rashad Ryan at left end, and he's aided by Edward Cooper from Wisconsin at right, followed by, if you just scroll down, yeah, give us a few more, and we see Sean Hudson at SMU. There is D tackle, and Merrick of South Carolina is the other D tackle. Brooks, another Syracuse player, playing left outside linebacker, and Joyce from Duke, another user team, making an appearance. We see Hines, a second player from South Carolina, on the defense. The corners are Newton from Arizona State and Williams, again from Washington. Ryan Downs from Navy is the free safety on the first team, and Dodds is the strong safety from Hawaii. Knight makes an appearance, another Syracuse player, as the kicker. And Ohio State's Nelson is the punter, and the returner is Kraus of Syracuse for the first team all NCAA.
Yeah, a few user teams making appearances. Obviously, we had a member from Duke. We had a member from Navy. We had a former user team's strong safety in Dodds from Hawaii make an appearance. But looking at the rest of this first team, the offensive line, very much with the exception of TCU's center, the offensive line very much blue blood programs in Michigan, USC, Alabama, and Texas. And then defensively, it looks to be, secondary is a little bit West Coast oriented. And other than that, besides the user teams, we go into the southeast region of the country for many of the first team all NCAA.
Indeed.
Looking at the second team all NCAA team, what are your thoughts, Coach Silent Storm?
Yeah, looking at the second team, we have the quarterback out of San Jose State, Maurice Young, there for the on the offense side of the ball at quarterback. You got two halfbacks and Tommy Wright out of Texas and Kevin Beard from Auburn. Then you have Mike Mantonia from USC at receiver, as well as Freddie Rogers from Virginia. Then we have our first user player on the second team, Reggie Henry, tight end from Navy. And then to round out for the offensive lineman on the second team, you have Adam Warren from Wisconsin, Richie Thomas from Notre Dame, Scott Carter from South Carolina, Craig McDonald from Oregon State, and Maurice Lawson, Virginia. So a couple ACC schools to kind of take on there on the second team. A lot of teams actually from the East Coast there, besides a few others on the offensive side.
Yeah, Reggie Henry, the star tight end for Navy. I've been calling his name for years on the Navy broadcasts, and a very deserving preseason All-American selection. I expect he will be a principal focal point of the Navy offense once again. The rest of the players, there are two Virginia players on offense on the second team All-Americans. So while they may be down from last season, they are certainly capable of being a challenging team in SEC play. Other than that, a lot of blue blood programs on offense with Texas, Auburn, USC, Wisconsin, Notre Dame, South Carolina. Looking at the offense there, user teams, it's a challenge to break through on these lists. The Blue Bloods, even though we're several seasons down the road, the Blue Bloods dominate these lists.
Indeed, and as you can see here, looking at the defensive side of the second team, we're looking at ends from Alabama and Michigan and Pearson Williams, tackles from Ohio State and Alabama in Chambers and Rosario, the linebackers, Michigan, USC, Northwestern, and Navy are the two sort of unusual players on defense here. With Fuqua and Bellamy at right outside linebacker and corner. But, again, it returns to Florida and Alabama for corner and free safety. And then the strong safety from Missouri again. So that's, outnumbered, 8-3 on defensive players of Blue Bloods and not Blue Bloods. And even then,
my suspicion on the strong safety from Missouri is that they are so awful in the SEC that
he gets all the tackles.
So many plays get to the third layer of the defense.
Yeah, no, I suspect that's true. But even then, if we've looked at Northwestern, we looked at Navy, they are currently 4 or 5-star programs. They're beginning to get a little bit of blue, not a lot, just a touch. So to see them in there with the Michigans is not nearly as surprising to see Alabama. Missouri in there with the Alabamas. So this is a team that's, again, as you said, all of the Blue Bloods.
We would be remiss. You're absolutely right, Coach. There are some breakthroughs, and they've been indicative of several seasons of trying to tap on that ceiling. Seasons of success for both the Northwestern Wildcats and the Navy Midshipmen. Two schools with a lot of similarities, certainly academic-wise, and certainly with regard to trying to break through into the elite programs. I believe I don't like speaking for you, but I believe that I can say that Navy has no difficulty being grouped together with an institution as highly rated as Northwestern.
Absolutely not.
We would be remiss to say to not mention that we do have another user on the second team,
Indeed, we do.
Hughes from Indiana, the place kicker. Coach Seawack never one to shy away from the smart decision when it comes to kicking the field goal. And Isaiah Hughes, a junior, representing the Indiana Hoosiers there on the second team All-American team.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, of course, we immediately again return to the story of the preseason All NCAA with Bell and Steele coming from Georgia and Notre Dame, once again perennial powerhouses. It's interesting to me that we actually saw more teams that were more unusual on the first team, suggesting that there are those gems that are rare that can show up anywhere, that break out at Middle Tennessee State and Colorado State and San Jose State and TCU and Syracuse. But that to consistently get players that are just going to be, as consistently good that gets them the second team. That's going to be your blue bloods. That's not going to be, Duke and Arizona State and Hawaii sneaking in one guy who is just, an incredible talent. You know what I mean? The first team is freaks. The second team is, pedigree show dogs.
Yeah, I think it's I was gonna say I think it's a pretty accurate assessment there of the first team just being those guys that are impacts to their team and come to play week in and week out, and definitely deserving of the first team. And the second team are pretty much just like you say, the pedigrees. They are show dogs. They're filled with a lot of the blue blood schools. So I think it's a very fair assessment.
That takes us to the most prestigious preseason list of all, which is the initial Heisman contenders. The top 5 lists, very user heavy. And seeing as how there are 2 users that are represented who are currently on this broadcast, I'll turn it over to the third user to run down this list. Coach Silent Storm, if you could give us your insights into the initial Heisman watch list, at least to start us off, I'd be very interested.
Yeah, what an honor to be able to start off talking this, because I don't have a player in the Heisman race. But hey, these guys that are here are very deserving to be here. Of course, you see 3 Syracuse players in here, which is, of course, a testament to what Coach Spector has done with his team and the players he's recruited, because these are obviously all his guys that he's brought in here, and so they're definitely and they're impact players to their team. But of course, Fran Tarkenton, the Heisman winner last season, of course, I'd expect him to be the front runner to start the year, as he did not leave early to go to the NFL. He decided to come back for his senior season and try to increase that Syracuse national title to 5 in a row. And so he came back at the helms to lead his team there. So no surprise that he starts off in number 1 position. Big shock, not because of his numbers, but this is something you don't see very often as a defensive player to even be in the list, and not even be the list, to be number 2 on the list. Derek Brooks, the stud outside.
Or be in the list in the preseason.
Yeah, to be in the list in the preseason. This is to show, based off of what he's done in the past, he's just been if you
look at his stats, his stats, get why they back it up.
Oh, yeah, 75 sacks last year. I mean, you see his first
113 tackles.
Yeah, 113 tackles, 90 for loss, 75 sacks. I mean, this dude is a monster. He won 3 different awards last season, so it's definitely deserving. To be a defensive player on this list is amazing. And like we mentioned before, the freshman Peter Moss just did phenomenal things last year for Navy. And it's showing, being the third guy on the list here to start the season. That could be somebody that could give a run for the money to Tarkenton.
No longer a kid, no longer a freshman. He is a 93 sophomore.
Yeah, which is just unbelievable to have a 93 rating as a sophomore. You know this guy is going to be – he's going to do wondrous things at Navy throughout his entire career. Then you have Ernest Biner, the next man behind Moss, the other Syracuse, the third and last. It's sad to say. I wouldn't say it's sad to say, but of course, being third behind two other guys is still no knock at him because he is a big part of this Syracuse team as well. And Biner is the fourth guy there, and also could give any of those guys a run for the money because he's a big piece to their offense. And
talking about Biner, if you look at his stats, the rushing yards certainly didn't lead the country, but he won the Doak Walker Award because of his versatility. He's much more so like a Roger Craig or a Marshall Faulk. I mean, 91 yards per game and 19 touchdowns, those are not world-beating numbers. But when you combine them with his receiving, then you start to understand why he's being considered.
Oh yeah, he puts up. He's putting up 150 yards offensively together, and even with not the big number, he still rushed over 1,000 yards, averaged 8.3 a carry, which any coach in the country would take a running back averaging 3 yards a carry, and he was 164, look like 164 yards shy of going 1,000 rushing, 1,000 receiving. But 13 receiving touchdowns and 19 rushing touchdowns. So yeah, this dude is a force to be reckoned with. And then we said the big shocker on the All-American list, and showing up here as the fifth quarterback fifth player in the Heisman, and the quarterback Maurice Young from San Jose State with a 97 overall looks to have himself a good year and to make a claim to be a Heisman contender himself.
Yeah, certainly a surprise there, a welcome surprise for Spartan fans. If we were talking earlier about the Mountain West this year being completely unpredictable. He'll have his say in the Mountain West Conference as an outstanding quarterback. A quarterback, as you know, can make a huge difference. So I wouldn't rule out San Jose State either as a potential dark horse there in the Mountain West. But I want to backtrack to Peter Moss and looking at his stats. What's very interesting about Peter Moss is that, what's not interesting is the passing. The passing is to be expected because Navy plays a very smart, conservative style of play. So they're not going to have explosive numbers. You look at his rating, very solid, nearly 160 rating, and certainly positive differential between touchdowns and interceptions. But the yardage is not going to pop out. Now, the completion percentage, extremely accurate at 82.6. But if you move over to his rushing yardage, here's where he makes his statements. Here's where he becomes part of the conversation. Any player, whether he's a quarterback or a running back, any player who runs for 1,400 yards and 26 touchdowns at 111 yards a game is going to be a part of the conversation. And to do so as a freshman, obviously, the sky's the limit for this kid. He is the youngest guy on this list. He is the only player who's not a junior or senior. And, the fact that he's third on the list as a sophomore, the fact that he finished in the top 5 last year as a freshman, this is a guy to watch.
He's actually the only guy that's not a senior. Actually, the other 4 are all seniors.
Yeah, and I mean, he's great, and we were very surprised when he got onto the Heisman list at the end of last season, and it made more sense as the season ended, and he continued to just be more and more of a focal point of the offense in that running game. That was something originally we were concerned, and we thought we would had to ease him into it, and the answer was no, boss, give me the rock, I want to take it all the way, and he sure did. So we're gratified to see, how much he's improved in the offseason, and that there is some recognition for what he did last year and for what we can expect him, hopefully, to do this year.
I think the only thing standing in his way is the guy who might actually be the best player on Navy's roster this year, the halfback Joe Bright.
Yeah, and it might be that they become and then, well, honestly, with the offensive line that Navy has this year, they're going to have to play complementarily. They're going to have to be a 1-2 punch, because there's no way that it can just be Moss or just be Biner with the deficiencies that Navy has on the offensive line.
Yeah,
Bright, you mean, right?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. I saw Biner and I meant Bright.
yeah. I was gonna say that there's probably still some other players that obviously are not on this list that would like to have a say as the season progresses. So we'll have to see how this Heisman race shapes up as the season moves on.
Indeed.
Yeah, the only thing that I am species of is the ability. I mean, it's very flattering for Derek Brooks to be second in this preseason poll, but I am suspicious that he can stay in the top 5 throughout the season. They're basing this off of his 75 sacks last season, but given the fact that the beginning of the season inevitably starts with several user games, I would suspect that Brooks will drop out of this quite quickly.
Usually,
He won't be getting buckets of sacks in user games, and maybe perhaps starts out highly rated may help him in the back. But it's a harder hill to climb when you're trying to crack the list in order to win it than it is if you stay on the list the whole season. So it's very flattering that Brooks is second as a defensive player. I would be absolutely shocked if he were to win it when it's all said and done.
yeah. No, I agree, and it'll be a question of how high can he stay in the first 5-6 weeks.
Yeah, I'm with you there. For any defensive player to even be considered is a true honor, but it would definitely be a shock. The league is everybody loves offense, and offense. The saying is, offense puts the fans in the stands, defense wins games. It's definitely true, and people love to see those high flying offenses and big numbers on the offensive side of the board. So, to his disadvantage, more than likely, we're going to probably see some offensive guy who had. Who, if he's not too far off this list now, if he has a good couple big first weeks, could be trending up, and Brooks be the first guy to start trending down, just because of the league or college football as a whole always wanting to see offense over the defense.
Yeah, the only 2 defensive players to win the Heisman Trophy were Leon Hart, the end for Notre Dame in 1949, and Charles Woodson, who won it in 97 for Michigan. And Charles Woodson was highly esteemed. He was on the preseason watch list, and he had several interceptions at cornerback, obviously an illustrious NFL career. But it wasn't until a third of the way through the season when Michigan started putting him on special teams, putting him in the return position, and then additionally incorporating him in select offensive formations. I think he wound up with 400 or 500 yards receiving. They in efforts of his Heisman push, they had to involve him both offensively and on special teams for him to win.
Yeah, which you're probably not going to see a linebacker unfortunately be able to do.
I mean, unless Brooks starts playing fullback, I believe that's the probably the most physically appropriate position for him to attempt on the offense.
Yeah, so we're not gonna put anything at risk. We have enough tough hurdles to climb in the opening weeks of the season that we are by no means interested in preserving Brooks's individual standing in an individual award. We are very much focused on the team aspect as always. So I think it could be. Depending on the duality of Bright and Moss at Navy and what it takes to win the games and how explosive Navy is able to be if they are able to be a little bit more offensive than normal. I know that's something that has been researched by the academy in terms of being a little bit more spread out, a little bit more wide open. It remains to be seen what effect that'll have if they are able to stay with it, if it is sustainable. What effect that'll have on the duality of Bright and Moss. I think, prognosticators would say that the heavy favorite is probably Tarkenton to repeat. And I say that with a high degree of fairness, I believe.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The way that Syracuse has played us on the offensive side of the ball, you look all these past seasons, has primarily come from that quarterback position. I mean, it's been Tarkenton this year, and I'm pretty sure the 3 previous years before that, it was Tanavasa. So it's been a Syracuse quarterback, if I'm not mistaken, to win the Heisman the last 4 years in a row. So due to the way Coach Spector and the Syracuse offense likes to run their offense, it primarily goes around how well Tarkenton, or the quarterback position particularly, plays. So Tarkenton is, in my opinion, probably the favorite to win the Heisman this year.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable considering their past performance and the continued roster and coaching staff around Tarkenton. I think the safe money is definitely on Tarkenton to win.
Well, talking about the Heisman race and prognosticating conferences leads us into what we can expect for season 18, and everything's going to change week by week. The input of information on the previous week's result will affect the judgments of the experts on how teams may or may not perform. It will certainly affect the momentum of teams in terms of how they perform week to week. And given as such, it's appropriate that we close out the broadcast with an in-depth look at week 1 specifically, and what we have in store in the coming week. We have we have 3 broadcast channels now, with the League1 Twitch channel, with Six Gun Ninja's Twitch channel, with Blitzkrieg 77's Twitch channel, and with Silent Storm's Twitch channel. We have the ability now for our viewers and fans to broadcast several games each week. And week 1 is certainly an exciting way to kick us off.
And just to add to that, Coach, we actually did recently get Silent Hawk joined us as well. So we have another user that has a broadcast channel on top of the ones you listed as well.
Absolutely. So League 1 becoming more and more broadcast friendly, more and more visible. And Coach Ninja, if you would take a look at our week 1 games and give your thoughts, and then I can give my thoughts, and then Coach Silent Storm can close us out with his thoughts and take us through to the end of the broadcast.
Indeed. So as you can see, we will have a number of games to broadcast in week 1. Georgia at Ole Miss will be on Silent Hawk's Twitch and hosted here. And Buffalo at Minnesota, a user game, will be on Blitzkrieg's channel and hosted here. And then the kickoff classic between Syracuse and Navy in the Meadowlands will be both on Six Gun Ninja's channel, my channel, that I share with Syracuse, and hosted here. So there's going to be a lot of League 1 content getting right back into it after the off season. Georgia at Ole Miss is going to be an important game because Georgia's very good. And of course, 2 user matchups, as we see in the beginning of the season, always important to set the tone, and see what's going to be for the rest of the season. Also, of course, interesting rematches in that Buffalo and Minnesota played twice last year when the head coach of Minnesota was at CMU, and Navy is the only coach in League 1. Sorry, not the only coach, but the most recent coach in League 1 history to beat Coach Spector in a national title game in a previous head coaching position when Spector was at Washington State and I was at Penn State. So 2 important rematches there in our user matchups to begin season 18.
I'm particularly excited about the 2 neutral site games. We have one at Soldier Field in Chicago, with Buffalo and Minnesota taking the field against each other at Soldier Field. That will be very exciting. Obviously, number 1 versus number 2 at any point in the season. It is a rare enough occasion that no matter what week it takes place, number 1 versus number 2, always an exciting affair, always a nationally televised game. And I suspect that all eyes will be tuned into to MetLife Stadium in the New Meadowlands to take in Syracuse and Navy taking the field in New York, or just outside New York at the New Meadowlands, number 1 versus number 2. That will be exciting. We have a traditional matchup between Indiana and Washington in the Tar Heel Bowl, also a League One tradition, as well as Ole Miss's introduction into the SEC. So we have 4 games that are involving 7 users and 3 user matchups here in week 1. We're getting this season kicked off with a bang. We're getting this season kicked off with some exciting matchups, some exciting venues and locales, and some old rivalries being rekindled, some old matchups being rekindled. And I'm looking at these 4 games, and my mouth is watering. There's nothing but excitement here on my end, looking here at week 1.
Yeah, I can't pick a favorite game. I mean, to look forward to when we're looking at these user matchups, because they all have some sort of story to it. There's some sort of background to each one that it's just like, I can't wait for this game. I mean, we talk about the Ole Miss game, it's Coach Silent Hawk's introduction to Ole Miss, and it's against Georgia. It's against one of those blue chip teams from the SEC. It's a real test right off the bat. Brand new school, and you got to go against Georgia in your SEC premiere. And of course, the Tar Heel Bowl has been decided, like we've mentioned many times, it's been decided by 1 score in the last 8 times they've played, and this is the 9th meeting between the 2. So obviously that game is exciting to watch. You get the rematch of Buffalo, the head coach of Buffalo and the head coach of Minnesota. Obviously, Bitch Creek being at Central Michigan in the past, but they get a kind of a rivalry developing there between the 2 of them, and of course the 1 and 2, getting to see the 1 and 2 right off the bat in week 1 is awesome, and I can't wait for those when it comes to user games. I know outside of user games, there were a few games when we were looking at the top 25 that were kind of standing out to me as well that I want to quickly mention. Besides some of those rivalry games, we get Notre Dame at Texas week 1. So that's an exciting CPU game that I look to see. Texas having a pretty stacked roster, and obviously Notre Dame starting number 9. And you're getting to see Notre Dame at Texas, the 2 big schools going at it. Can't wait to see that one. There was maybe another 1 or 2. The Chick-fil-A kickoff game, LSU, Virginia Tech. So you got a powerhouse SEC team going against an ACC team there. We'll see what happens there. Alabama and USC in the Cowboys Classic. Now, Alabama's starting off not ranked this season, but their roster is completely loaded, and so is that USC team. So that one I think will be really interesting. We talked about how good USC can be. Alabama probably feeling a little stubbed not being in the top 25. That is being labeled the game of the week, even though the game of the week will be the number 1 versus number 2 game. But the game labeling this the game of the week. And number 19, South Carolina going up against 14th ranked Oklahoma in the Texas kickoff. That also will be a very exciting non-conference game. And then Michigan going against Arkansas to see if Arkansas can bounce back and maybe give Michigan an early loss to start the season.
One other thing I want to note real quickly about Alabama. Alabama is no longer coached by Nick Saban in League One. He retired at the end of season 16, and the the 11-1 runner-up head coach of the Air Force Falcons, who lost in the national title game to Coach Spector, was the coach who was able to take that job at Alabama. He was level 9 when he started.
He was the Air Force coach after one season. The original Air Force coach who had the option attack, the academy offense, is now running that academy offense at App State.
Indeed.
It was a one-year coach at Air Force. He parlayed the previous coach's recruiting success and roster success into a top 10 finish, into an appearance in the national title game, and then into the Alabama job. So Alabama, as you mentioned, Coach, coached by a younger, less experienced coach these days.
So yes, and to be fair, he was the offensive coordinator for that. So he got promoted from offensive coordinator at Air Force to head coach. He was only head coach for 1 year at Air Force. But when he began the season at Alabama, he was a level 9 coach. I checked in the postseason of last season, and he was a level 21 coach. He went from 9 to 21 in a single season at Alabama, and that shows you how much is going on in play and what you have to do even to get to 500, the kinds of accomplishments that you have to make to get to 500 and get a bowl game in the SEC.
Yeah, Alabama went 6-6 last season, although they were 6-3 in the SEC, and that 6-3 record allowed them to get the prestigious Cotton Bowl berth against Texas last year.
Indeed. So, and it was an impressive turnaround from a bad start, but he gained. You're right. He's still very young, but he gained a tremendous amount of experience in that 1 year at Alabama.
I'll tell you, I'm glad that Coach Soundstorm pointed out some of these other Week 1 games, these other kickoff classics, the Cowboys kickoff classic, which we're talking about now, Alabama versus USC. In Jerry World in Dallas, Texas, or actually in Arlington, Texas. Alabama, USC will be interesting. LSU, Virginia Tech will be interesting. And South Carolina, Oklahoma will be interesting. The 3 CPU neutral site games. And then, of course, we have 2 user games, as mentioned before, that are highlighted with neutral site kickoff classic games. The one in Soldier Field in Chicago, featuring Buffalo and Minnesota, and of course the one at MetLife Stadium, featuring number 1 Navy and number 2 Syracuse. The neutral site games this year, quite appetizing.
Oh yes, absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, it is this Week 1. We're absolutely spoiled this Week 1 of this 18th season.
So take her away, Coach.
Yeah, that is going to do it for us here. We have officially started the 18th season of League 1. Week 1 is live. Our user coaches I've seen throughout the broadcast have been signing in, probably excited to see what their overall teams have turned out to be now, looking at their first week of recruiting and to see their schedules. So it is all officially released. Website will be updated shortly. You see the link on top of our screen there, League1, collegefootball.com. You can get all your League 1 action there, all the previous game broadcast, when the games will be brought, what times and days the games will be live, as well as our schedules and many other things there as well. And obviously the link to the Twitch channel for League 1 football as well to find all our games live.
What are the avenues where our listeners, our avid followers, what are the avenues where they can be updated? I'm sure there's more than one. What are the avenues where they can find out the broadcast schedule for this week?
The broadcast schedules will be listed, obviously, on the website in the league news section as soon as you turn in. It's the second link on the top menu. You've also scrolled down on the homepage. You'll be able to see it there, as well as Facebook. We have a Facebook page. Don't have the link to that on the channel, but we will have a link to that on the website. I'll be working on making sure that is listed there. Every week, I'll do my best to make sure that I have these games live when they're live, posted to many different venues on Facebook and Twitch to get our viewers many different ways to watch the game. If you don't know when they are happening live, or if you look ahead of time and get to see the show times, there'll be places to see them happening live when they are happening live. And I think that will pretty much do it for us here to sign off. I will run the official new League 1 intro video that you'll be seeing brought into all, especially my personal broadcast of Silent Gaming. Whenever we play some League 1 game, I'm playing it. It may be featured in other user games, but or user-led Twitch games. But this is the official League 1 intro hype video. That's how I'll end to kick off the start of our season. Yes, season 18. But I am signing off. This has been Coach Silent Storm,
Coach Six Gun Ninja,
Coach Spectre.
And Coach Spectre, if you would do us the honors of your famous League 1 sign-off.
Obviously, stay safe out there and take care of you and yours. We hope you have an excellent week. Kick its ass.
Spanning more than 15 successful seasons and covering the country from Florida, North Carolina, Iowa, Ohio, Oklahoma, California, and Virginia. This is League 1 NCAA football. This is League 1 NCAA football.